We're going back to 2008 for this tragic tale of a young disabled man being preyed upon by a triumvirate of thuggish arseholes. But for me, at least, the main force behind the escalation in what happened to 25-year-old Christopher Gray was a young lady who seemed to thrive in stirring the pot. Chris Gray was a total innocent who may have been experiencing one of his first ever crushes. He was pretty childlike due to a developmental delay. A delay so significant that despite being an adult, he still had a legal guardian, which gives an indication of the level of issues he experienced in his daily life. But the young lady he had a crush on told her incarcerated boyfriend about this harmless crush, and his insecurities did the rest. This is the harrowing story of how a trusting man had thought he had made some new friends, only to be fatally betrayed, and how police agencies were able to work together alongside surveillance footage and recorded phone calls to unravel how this innocent man met a senseless end. This is Murder of Crows.
You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. Silence all the crows, lining up in little rows. A sudden chill surrounds me. Silence all the crows, see come out and say you're old. A sudden chill.
On June the 25th, 1983, Michael Gray and Deborah Kemp welcomed a little boy into the world in Hanover, New Hampshire. This baby was Christopher Gray, and Christopher grew up in Bradford, Vermont, with his two siblings. But Christopher's challenges were noted from an early age. He had significant learning difficulties, compounded by a speech impediment to cope with. He attended special learning programs, but when his parents divorced and ended up living a significant distance apart, an already challenging situation became untenable for the whole family. And Chris would spend time in Vermont's care system, where he crossed paths with Annie Crowley, who had housed Chris during one of the periods of respite care that he went through. As he progressed to adulthood, Chris spent some time living with his father, but there came a point where he didn't want to stay there any longer. And it was then that he chose to relocate, to live with Annie Crowley full time, and she became his legal guardian. It suited both Chris and Annie, as Chris just became part of the family, with Chris often calling Annie Mom. Having finally found a loving and supportive home environment, Chris thrived. And while he wanted to ultimately work as a nurse's aide, he got a job in Walmart, where he was a valued member of the team. Chris worked as a cashier, so he was capable of more complex tasks with the right support. But his naivety and innocence came through in his apparent willingness to trust unconditionally, and he would do anything to help others. He had many friends at work, including one co-worker that he seemed to develop a crush on, a 17-year-old girl called Amber Talbot. Chris was really coming into his own. He was accepted for who he was and was doing really well. Until October the 6th, 2008, when he seemed to just vanish. That morning, Annie dropped him off for work at Walmart, as she often did. And Chris was his normal self, so nothing seemed off in any way. Chris texted Annie to say he would be spending the night with friends, as he'd done many times before, and he said he'd either see her the next morning or after work the following night. He worked an afternoon shift at Walmart and usually finished at 11:30 p.m. So Annie was satisfied that Chris, as he normally did, kept in touch to let her know what he was doing and where he was going. But when the 7th of October came and went, Annie frantically made the rounds of Chris's co-workers, but they hadn't seen him. And when trying to call his mobile, it went straight to answer phone. When there was still no sign of Chris on the 8th of October, Annie contacted the Vermont State Police, who, given Chris's vulnerable nature, jumped straight into action. Now, obviously with missing persons, they had to start with where Chris had last been seen, which was working at Walmart on the 6th of October. Now, if true crime fans know anything about Walmart, it's that they always seem to have excellent CCTV systems. And the Walmart in Haverhill, New Hampshire, was no different. So, scanning the CCTV footage, the police saw Chris at the end of his shift towards the front of the store, where he seemed to be looking outside for someone. He left the store, but soon returned to get his jacket. This time when he leaves the store, he never returns to Walmart again. Switching to another camera at the front of the store, they see a dark car pull up, a man in a yellow top get out, allowing Chris to get in. And this suggests to me that they wanted to ensure that Chris could not access the door, but that is purely conjecture on my part. The car leaves and Chris is not seen again. Now, unfortunately, the footage did not allow accurate recognition of the car and did not show the license plate in order to trace it. But what the footage does do is give the police a starting point in working out what happened to Christopher Gray. Detective Potter, who was the state police investigator, knew he didn't have the intimate knowledge of Haverhill. So thankfully, rather than just ploughing on in the vain hope that he might get lucky, he decided to turn to the community police of Haverhill, as they may have more familiarity with the car and with its occupants. Now, those police equally did not waste time in getting on with analysing the footage, and they spent many hours looking at not just the time when Chris got in the car, but a fair chunk of time before, in the hopes that they would see more details of the car and of the people inside it. Their hard work pays off when a clearer image of the car shows a red stripe on the detailing and a fin at the back of what turns out to be a Honda Civic. Local knowledge from the community police identifies that car as belonging to Haverhill resident Michael Roby. Job done. Well, no. At that time, 17-year-old Michael Roby was actually in the local jail. So while it may have been his car, he can't have been the one driving it. Bugger. One step forward and 2 steps back. But at this time, the police were still analysing the surveillance footage to see if more could be determined about the occupants. And the combination of tenacity, dedication and local knowledge not only turned up footage of the 2 male passengers and the female driver in the store, but allowed the identification of the female as Michael Roby's girlfriend, Amber Talbot. The same Amber Talbot that Chris had developed a crush on. This is not going to end well, is it? The other occupants of the Honda were identified as 23-year-old Timothy Smith and his cousin, 17-year-old Anthony Howe. Maybe Chris actually had made some new friends and then somehow over the next few hours had got lost. Maybe. Yeah, me neither. With 3 people of interest now identified, the police started the process of locating them for questioning. And I'm sure you can guess what happened when it came to the questioning. If you said that they told an accurate and succinct account that was in agreement across all three accounts, then sadly you'd be wrong. If you said that they turned on each other and downplayed their own involvement, ding ding ding, because of course they bloody did. It soon became apparent that Chris, who wanted a pleasant evening with his new friends around a bonfire, had been set upon and apparently stabbed multiple times. But with stories morphing and changing, it was difficult to accurately reconstruct what had happened.
How does it come about that Chris is going to get a ride with you guys?
Tim asked him if he would like to come up and hang out with us for a little while. We drove back to the house.
What takes place there?
Me, him, Smith, and Chris got out of the car. Amber didn't even get out. Tim asked her to go to her mom's house for a little while. She wound up spending the night there. I went inside. Those guys came inside.
You go inside, what happens next?
Went outside, got a fire. I'd say not even 20 minutes after we started. I looked over toward the fire, and Tim looked upset, not saying anything, and Chris was just silent. And Tim just reaches over with a knife and just starts stabbing him.
Describe for me exactly what you saw.
I saw Tim pull the knife from the back of his pants and come up like from behind him. He jumped on his back, wrapped an arm around his throat, and pulled him down to the ground. And he just kept stabbing him.
What happened?
We brought him back to the house. It was just me and him. We got in a big brawl. We were fist fighting the whole night. And then we ended up wrestling down on the ground. And I ended up stabbing him a couple times.
What did you end up stabbing him with?
My knife.
Stabbed him how many times?
I don't know.
How many do you think?
A lot.
What's a lot? 5, 10, 15?
I don't know. Keep going.
What did you do with the knife?
It's up in the ceiling.
Did you do this all by yourself?
Yes. It happened so quick. I'm looking at a long time now, and
It's premature and I don't know that answer. Have you guys ever had any type of disagreements or confrontations prior to that?
this is the first one.
Was this the first time you'd ever been over to the house?
How much do you think you had to drink?
Not to do something stupid.
What happened after this confrontation?
I ended up putting him in the barn for a day, so nobody would know.
From there you took the body and did what with it?
I put it behind Amber's house, and dug a big hole and put him right in it.
Okay. And when did you do that?
Today.
Safe to say that Smith and Howe were clearly the central characters in the actual attack on Chris. But what was less clear at this stage was if and how Amber Talbot and Michael Roby were involved. It seemed likely that they were, since only Amber had a personal acquaintance with Chris, with them being co-workers, and Smith and Howe would have had no motive for attacking Chris so ragefully and violently. So in order to find out if Roby, who was still incarcerated, and Talbot had any knowledge or involvement, the police set about obtaining recordings of all the jail phone calls between Roby and Talbot, and there were a lot of them. Showing the same determination and tenacity that they had approached the Walmart CCTV footage with, the police listened to all 200 hours of phone calls. And soon they were able to find recordings of Michael Roby and Amber Talbot discussing the attack on Chris. Boom! Great police work.
Yeah, it does.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Did everything clean up this morning?
There's one more thing they have to do, and it's all done.
Sweet.
They killed the coyote.
Sweet.
So the police brought Amber Talbot back in with this new knowledge of the jail conversations tucked away in their back pocket. Now, Talbot originally stuck to her original story of not being involved. But when she was confronted with the jail phone calls, she soon changed her tune and admitted that she knew far more than she had let on.
I did drop him off at the house. Chris came and got in the car, and we drove down to Newberry Crossing. Across the street, there's a house up on the hill, and I dropped him off 200 feet to the right of that.
Amber, you're at a point right here now where you can go down with the ship, or you can try to help yourself. You're gonna tell the truth, or you're gonna go down in flames. We're talking serious time, Amber.
I know you know exactly what happened. Just tell me.
I did break into the house. I was told to leave. Tim did tell me that he stabbed him.
Why did he kill him?
I believe it may have been because he was hitting on me.
What was Mike's whole reaction to this whole thing?
He was scared of losing me, which makes him very angry.
What did his anger lead him to do?
I know Mike had said something about Chris was to be beat up. Tim had mentioned something about killing.
Did you know that this was going to take place?
That's what Tim told me, yes.
Tim told you what?
That he was going to kill him, and I told him not to.
Okay. But you dropped him off anyways?
Yes.
Rather than a chance meeting that turned ugly, it seemed far more like something of a honey trap, with Amber setting Chris up to be, at the very least, beaten, although killing had been discussed previously. And it was strongly suspected that the attack had been carried out at Michael Roby's request. So the three involved were completely fucked at this point. And Roby may also have been fucked. And the overall investigation finally led to Chris's body being discovered in a shallow grave behind Roby and Talbot's home. He had been stabbed multiple times. The knives used were found hidden in the attic area of the home, along with bloody clothes, and fingerprints of both Smith and Howe were found on the knives. Based on the information discovered, Smith, who wrote a letter of apology to Chris's family, was ultimately charged with second-degree murder, and Howe was charged with hindering apprehension. While Talbot and Roby, having not been present for the actual attack, were charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Now, when the case progressed to trial, Smith, Howe and Talbot all pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Smith and Howe each received 40-year sentences, while Talbot received 25 to 50 years. When it became clear that it could not be explicitly stated that Roby had ordered the attack, the prosecutors did the next best thing that they could and piled on all the lesser charges that they could. And Roby was finally charged with and pleaded guilty to assault, conspiracy to assault, hindering apprehension, and conspiracy to hinder apprehension. Take that, you cockwomble. The totting up process led to Roby being sentenced to 25 to 40 years. His minimum sentence was later reduced by a year after he completed educational goals. Did he complete these to better himself, or to get a reduced sentence? I wonder what his motivation was. It became clear during the investigation that the motive was Roby being terrified of losing Talbot, and Chris Gray hitting on her must have piqued Roby's insecurities. And when combined with not being able to be with Talbot due to his incarceration, it set in motion a series of events that were completely unnecessary, since Chris was a naive man with a harmless crush. But to my mind, the truly nasty bitch in all of this is Amber Talbot, who I imagine absolutely revelled in stirring the pot and telling Roby about the co-worker who fancied her. I bet she goaded and goaded him until events gathered momentum and an innocent kid was killed for no good reason. She was the true driving force behind what happened to Chris Gray. Chris Gray was doing well in his life. He had challenges for sure, but having found a supportive home environment, a job where he was well liked and valued, and a genuine joie de vivre, he was thriving, and he would have been an ongoing force for good in the world. But he wasn't given the chance to become the star he surely would have been within his own world, just because of the egos and insecurities of a bunch of thugs. This video is, of course, dedicated to Christopher Gray, and I hope his family, and especially Annie Crowley, have found ways to cope with this unthinkable tragedy. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. Samson is apparently pouting somewhere, but he will be back, I'm sure. But with that said, I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.
you.